Thanks. John, you want to add something?
I'm listening to two fine examples, but I think if we're talking about what's going to be 50 years from now, I think we need to understand education as a dynamic process and not one that's static. So therefore, if any model that we would pick now as the ideal model for 50 years, we're already creating the problem that we have in education now, is that we're trying to adapt an agrarian model to a technological world. So therefore, we need to look at education not at all those models, not so much as a product, but as a process. What did it take place to create a model that was relevant for today? And therefore, every model we have will constantly change. Every model should shift after some point. So a model like Brockton may be appropriate for how we can get 5 years from now where we are. But it should never be the model for where we are 50 years. That's what's created the problem we have now. That's why teachers go back to what they know when they were taught, when it's not working, because they panic. They go back to the days of old, understanding that you can't use an 8-track in an iPod generation.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, the next major question is, what must we do? What must we do in our schools, our homes, our churches, and other community or cultural institutions to awaken and foster a real thirst for knowledge and for learning among our young people? And I'm going to start with Reverend Simpson. Junius Williams has to run. He's got to teach a course at Rutgers, so we're going to excuse him. But as soon as the class is over, you have to come back.
Don't violate it.
For that question in particular, I can talk about what we can do in our churches to awaken this kind of thirst and knowledge, and particularly in African American communities. I see Dr. Howard here. And Dr. Howard has an amazing freedom school here in Newark, and in my church in Brooklyn, we also conduct a freedom school, and it is an amazing experience for young people, particularly college students and college-age students who are given the responsibility of connecting with and waking up the next generation. And you know, the freedom schools were born out of the same freedom schools in the 1960s. The young people got on the buses, went down south to register people to vote. Well, you know, the Children's Defense Fund, in response to the Black Community Crusade for Children in the early 1990s, created a new model to do that same kind of intergenerational organizing. And we are engaging college students across the country to go back to their communities and to spend 6 to 8 weeks in the summertime with high school and elementary school students. And we are seeing incredible leaps in their own educational development, that they're stopping the learning gap. But the connection to culture, to history, to wanting to understand, you know, what's going on in the world, but then also to see, you know, the media generally portrays African American males in particular very negatively. But to see young men in our most impoverished communities who are teaching our young people, who are sitting with them, who are reading with them, who are helping them to connect with their own culture, and to see it happening in churches across the country, it's an amazing sight. And so that's one example.
Terrific. Reverend Spagner.
Yes, sir. The one thing that I'd like to suggest is that we take an intentionality about nurturing young people. The best example is one that we have in place at Fountain Baptist Church in Summit, New Jersey, in our Boys and Girls Rites of Passage. The way that we handle the program is that whatever that child shows up with, we are like the potter. We are interested in shaping and molding and bringing out, enhancing that, working with them, whatever they need. Whenever you are nurturing a plant or whatever, you do it as if it's the only plant that deserves that kind of attention at the moment. So the one thing that I'm very intentional about as Minister of Christian Education, I don't do it, but there are men and women that are successful of their own accord, but they take the time to invest in young people to nurture them, and they have a one-on-one type relationship. When I look at the various school models, and I did so on yesterday, just looking at Summit, New Jersey, and I looked at the public school ratio of 1 to 22, and Summit is one of the second greater districts in the state, as that was the case some time ago. At any rate, but then when I looked at the private schools in Summit, New Jersey, I found a 1 to 9, 1 to 7 relationship. There's a whole lot more nurturing going on in a 1 to 7 ratio than a 1 to 22. And you know, in some of our other districts, it's more like 1 to 35. So I am big on individual nurturing, and I heard a term earlier, intergenerational. One of the things that when we look at our African American history, and some of us have been around long enough to say that we have lived it, there is somebody that invested in you. There's somebody that invested in me, and they treated me as if I were the only person in the world. And so that is what I recommend for each of us to realize, that we are a committee of one that need to take on one in a nurturing spirit.
Terrific. Reverend Gamble.
I think we have to, in order for home, school, and church to really develop a thirst of knowledge and learning in our young people, I think number one, we have to stop playing the blame game. Because what we discover is each entity blames the other entity for the problem. And therefore there's no collective effort to really bring forth transformation. One thing I have learned, I guess I'm involved with all three of these as a father, a principal, and a pastor, that there's one entity from an educational and a church perspective that we really can't control, and that's the home. But at least 2/3 of those entities, we have power to impact change, and we have to take the responsibility to do it. Specifically, I'll take off the principal's hat and roll to the pastor's hat for a minute. In the churches, we have to actually, especially in churches of African descent, we have to actually become knowledgeable about what we talk about. Sometimes we pick up the fads or the bandwagon of the day, and we don't really understand what's going on. It's wonderful to read Jawanza Njufu's book, Countering the Conspiracies Perceived to Destroy Black Men or Keeping Black Boys Out of Special Education. But do our churches really understand what special education is? We've thrown the term around today already, 37%. One school having 37% of their students in special education. Okay, if that's a problem, then why in suburban communities are parents running to get their kids classified and demanding their kids to be classified? Because there's something about special education that could bring forth change in your child if you understand how to use it and hold the school system accountable for doing it the right way. Our problem is we all try to be Martin Luther King, but we really don't have the vision to really impact the tree.
Okay. Does anyone else want to jump into this conversation? Fred Mitchell?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to add, and I'll use an example.
Please, audience, please. Go ahead, Fred.
I'll use an example that we already heard about at Bethany. We have the Freedom School. But there's also a little smaller program that I participate there, the Boys' Rights and Passion, similar to what we talked about at the company. And what I've seen in being involved with that over the last several years is that young men who are involved in that get a sense of the different opportunities. And last weekend, I didn't participate, but we took the group down to Wall Street. And one of our members works for Citibank. And he took them on the trading floor and showed them what actually happens on a trading floor in the stock market. They went to Wall Street and actually saw Wall Street. And based on the conversations I had with those that went, you could see the change and inspiration come out of those young men that were there. It gave them hope. gave them a sense of this is something that I might be able to do someday, because they saw somebody who they see at church every day, someone they interact with at least once every month. And what they do is something that don't typically see coming from the communities that they come from. So I think that's one of the things that we can do in our churches and our communities, is to provide opportunities for our young people to see what the different options are if they pursue education in the right manner.
Dr. Boucher-Boone?
My comments in regards to this question concerning what do you think is most important to see the form and action to inspire young people to aspire to greatness and success. I think everyone in the room will agree that when we think back on our childhood, one of the things that we could in our very early years that we all engaged in was imagining things, imagining how things could be, dreaming. And I believe that at the core of a child's motivation to want to get to know, to learn, is the desire to fulfill the dreams. And I believe that what has happened to many of our children, especially African American children, and it's not only a function of the educators, but it's also a function of the family. We have failed to nurture the dreams. And so consequently, we have killed in many instances the intrinsic motivation to want to get to know. And as such, I believe that the challenge that confronts us now is one, the greatest challenge I believe that confronts educators is awakening the dream. Okay, and that for parents, it's being able to grow the dream. And I think if we can grow the dream, that process, we're going to be able to get kids to want to get to know. We're going to get kids to want to aspire to become. And education, therefore, is central to the process of getting to know and getting to succeed.
Janine, did I see your hand?
Yes, I think there's a basic skill that has been lost over at least the last 5 to 6 years. As many of you know, I consider myself a guru of social media. I think it's a magnificent thing, the Facebooks and the LinkedIn and the Blackberries and iPhones. But what I've found, and I see more and more of it, there is a loss of communication among young people and even among adults. Those of you in the room who are pastors, I think you would be shocked if tomorrow morning you stood at your pulpit and said, anyone in the sanctuary who is communicating with anyone during the service with your Blackberries, I want you to put your Blackberries and your iPhone now. It would probably shock you that even as you deliver your sermons, how many of your members only hear a third of the word because they're communicating with people all over this country right in their pews. My granddaughter, I tested her out a couple months ago, 17. She sent me a text. It said, Mimi, what's for dinner? And I looked at the Blackberry and I said, this is fascinating. She's upstairs in the east wing of the house. So, and I keep, when I'm not on a panel, I keep my Blackberry on the little bling. So I heard the bling again. It says big words, M, all caps, M-I-M-I. Mimi, what's for dinner? I looked at it and I said I should respond to her and say we don't communicate that way. I let her do it 4 times. Finally, she came downstairs. She said, Mimi, did you get my text? I said, oh, you're home? And my point is this. Children now, when you speak, that is a form of thinking and communication. And there's sometimes you'll say something, say, do those words really come out of my mouth? Kids aren't hearing that anymore. They're not tying up the telephone, talking to their friends. They're texting. They don't even hear what they're saying to people. And if you can't communicate, you just cannot learn because the whole thinking process is not occurring.